Hello, beloved, and welcome to Theology Thursday with me, Pastor Will, where we've been talking a little bit about what it is that Lutherans believe, using Luther's Small Catechism for our guide. We've been talking for several weeks now about the Ten Commandments, and in these past few weeks, we've been looking at those commandments that deal more with how we treat our neighbor. We've discussed how we are not to murder, commit adultery, nor steal, but rather how we are meant to protect our neighbor's life, dignity, and property. And this, of course, involves not just avoiding doing harm, but also actively seeking good. Now today, we're going to turn our attention to the Eighth Commandment. And here, we're going to discuss the importance of protecting our neighbor's good name and reputation. So let's get started. What is the Eighth Commandment? You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. What does this mean? We are to fear and love God so that we do not tell lies about our neighbors, betray or slander them, or destroy their reputations. Instead, we are to come to their defense, speak well of them, and interpret everything they do in the best possible light. And with the Eighth Commandment, we are protecting our neighbor's reputation and good name. And in some ways, this commandment has some commonality with the Second Commandment. The second, as you'll remember, was about honoring the name of God. And more than just a prohibition against using coarse language, it's really a guide for how we are to honor God's name in how we talk both to and about God. Here we're going to be examining how we can honor the name of our neighbor in word and deed, and in both speech to and about our neighbor. Now, as with the previous commandments, there seems to be a sort of obvious place to start. We are not meant to tell lies to or about our neighbor. The language of false witness may bring to mind images of a courtroom, and that's kind of a helpful image here. Because in a court, witnesses are placed under oath, and they are expected to speak only the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Indeed, there are consequences for lying under oath. Now, in the same way, we might consider ourselves under oath to God when we think about how we speak to and about others. We are expected to speak the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. That being the case, it's important to note that just because something is true does not mean that it's right for us to speak it. Luther notes that to have knowledge of sin is not the same thing as having the right to judge sin. And so if I know something embarrassing about my neighbor, and I know that it's true, if I tell that to others, I've still broken the Eighth Commandment. I've done harm to my neighbor's reputation by sharing something that was not mine to share. I'm reminded here of the three gates of speech attributed to the Persian Islamic scholar and Sufi mystic Rumi. He said, "Before you speak, let your words pass through three gates. At the first gate, ask yourself, is it true? At the second gate, ask, is it necessary? At the third gate, ask, is it kind?" And this is such an important consideration because being careless with the truth can cause harm. Now, Rumi is not advocating lying any more than Luther would, but rather considering whether the true information we have is ours to share and whether it serves life or deals death. Sometimes a harsh truth is necessary, and it can correct a wrong, and that is good. But other times we speak harsh truths that serve no real purpose except to tear someone else down. So we have to consider here not only our words, but also our attitudes and our motivations. Am I speaking this truth because it is necessary and will bring about a positive change? Or am I speaking it to make myself feel better in comparison to others who are being put down? Now, as with the other commandments we've looked at, it isn't enough just to avoid the evil if we do not also seek out the good. Luther says that we are to come to their defense, speak well of them, and interpret everything they do in the best possible light. And there's a lot of really important stuff to unpack here. In the Large Catechism, Luther writes that the first application of this commandment is that everyone should help his neighbor maintain his rights. This, Luther argues, is the plainest meaning of the commandment, that we should seek perfect justice and perfect equity. Now, obviously, this has implications for the courtroom, but we would be wise to recognize that this is true in our day-to-day life as well. So often, I hear people talk about their rights, but the flip side of that same coin is our responsibility. To keep the Eighth Commandment is to fulfill our responsibility to defend not only our own rights, but also the rights of our neighbors, no matter who our neighbor might be. Now, Luther also sees in this commandment an exhortation to deal appropriately with those who have wronged us. Here he points to Matthew chapter 19, wherein Jesus advises us to first go individually to the one who has wronged us. And Luther says that to do this is to spare the neighbor's reputation from being unnecessarily damaged. When we deal with things directly and assertively, we prevent airing our dirty laundry in public, and we protect both our own and our neighbors' reputations. Of course, when it is necessary, Jesus tells us to go on to bring witnesses, and they can attest to the truth. The goal of this, however, is to both achieve justice and, whenever possible, to move toward reconciliation. Reconciliation becomes vastly more difficult when we cause embarrassment or harm to the other party through careless speech. I think perhaps one of the hardest things that Luther advocates in this commandment is that we are to interpret everything our neighbor does in the best possible light. And so this commandment deals not only with my own words, but also with how I receive your words. It can be so easy to assume the worst about others, especially when we disagree with them. But assuming ill intent in our neighbors only puts us on the defensive, and it can often lead us to further problems. Now, we aren't meant to be naive. If someone tells me they intend to do me harm, then I should act accordingly. If they've already told me they intend ill, then the best possible interpretation of that is that they mean to do me ill. But far more common is the case where a marriage is damaged because each partner assumes the intentions of the other without ever talking about what's really happening. Or a friendship is broken because one person assigned ill intent to what was in truth a mistake or a misunderstanding. When we assume the good in our neighbor, we are far more likely to continue to seek understanding rather than cutting ties. As he does with some other commandments, Luther sums this up by saying that the sum and substance of the Eighth Commandment is that no one shall harm his neighbor, whether friend or foe, with his tongue. No one shall speak evil of him, whether truly or falsely, unless it is done with proper authority or for his improvement. A person should use his tongue to speak only good of everyone, to cover his neighbor's sins and infirmities, to overlook them, and to cloak and veil them with his own honor. Our chief reason for doing so should be the one which Christ indicates in the gospel and which in which he means to embrace all the commandments concerning our neighbor. Whatever you wish that men would do to you, do so to them. Beloved, that is all the time that we have for today. Thank you for joining me for this look at the Eighth Commandment. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Next week, we'll cover both the 9th and 10th commandments, as both of them deal with coveting. Until then, may God bless you and keep you, beloved. Amen.